all you lowlifes, all you scumbags, all you drug dealers, and all you crooked politicians need to answer one question, brother. What you gonna do when Donald Trump and all the Trumpomaniacs run wild on you, brother?
I'm pretty sure if you don't like Hulk Hogan, you're just not American. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another fantastic installment of Cowboy State Politics. From very high above all the puerile and vacuous forms of Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. As you're listening to this, we are still off on our honeymoon extravaganza. I'd tell you where we are most likely to be at this point during the vacation, but honestly, right now, I have no idea what the plan is. That, of course, is kind of the point. So, anyhow, I didn't want to leave you high and dry, so I've got a great interview with Representative Scott Smith. Scott, who is from Lingle, has an opponent in his first re-election bid. You've already met her.
Hello! Welcome to So Addicting!
That's right. Scott Smith's opponent is Jackie Van Mark. Big-time Liz Cheney supporter, and definitely not a real Republican. Of course, she doesn't have an actual voting record like a lot of these miscreants, but Jackie Van Mark does have a record in her advocacy and support and campaign managing and whatever else they called Liz Cheney's ridiculous bid for re-election. To the Wyoming Turkey Vulture, Wyoming Tribune Eagle. In an article entitled Cheney Announces State Leadership Team from June 21st of 2022. And I quote, U.S. Representative Liz Cheney has released the names of Wyomingites her campaign said are endorsing or otherwise supporting her during her re-election bid. Cheney currently holds Wyoming's only seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. Or she did. And if you scroll way down to the bottom on the list of names of people who are supporting Liz Cheney or are her campaign leads in the state during that re-election campaign, you'll find none other than Jackie Van Mark. It's way better than that, though. There's sound bites. Exemplary.
Well, we've got another 2 years till a presidential election. Maybe there's someone else in the Republican Party that can beat him. I would like to see it to be her. I think she would be fantastic.
And then there's this one.
Yeah? Does anyone have an opinion about the Cheney and Hageman race or the primary that's coming up?
Cheney all the way.
Yeah?
Cheney. The whole table.
No disagreement. And Van Mark's not ready to give up.
I'm going to say it's going to be Cheney by 5 points.
That would shatter all of the polls.
Would.
It would be a surprise, frankly.
It would, but I tend to be a Pollyanna. I'm really hopeful there's that silent majority out there that comes forward and says, no, enough is enough.
Oh, absolutely fantastic. Somebody should ask Van Mark what her thoughts on President Trump are now. Now, I actually would ask Jackie Van Mark if she'd like to come on the program for an interview, but my first question would already be toast. Listen to this.
Van Mark is a realtor and a farmer, but today she's at her sister's sewing shop in Torrington, not far from Fort Laramie. She's also a Republican who served in the George W. Bush administration.
To really clarify it, I'd have to show you the R on my rear end.
I don't even know what to say to that. Except that she must have got the wrong brand. Should have been an L or maybe a C or perhaps a double C, as in Cricket's Cheney. Anyway, Jackie Van Mark is not a Republican. She is at best an establishment Democrat plant who has been endorsed by Americans for Prosperity. If you have any doubt as to who AFP is, you should listen to the episode, Who is Amy Womack and AFP? It'll explain everything for you. They're definitely not conservative. They are not for prosperity. In fact, they support all of the candidates that are tax and spend big government liberals. Enough about Jackie Van Mark. Let's talk about Representative Scott Smith. According to WyoVote, Scott Smith is the second most conservative legislator in the entire Wyoming legislature, and he's second only to Representative Mark Jennings. Last week, before all this wedding madness, I had a chance to sit down with Scott and visit with him. Here is our discussion. Joining me on the program is Representative Scott Smith. Scott, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you, Dave.
Why don't you just take a few minutes and tell my audience about yourself?
Okay, well, I am Scott Smith. I'm the current representative for Wyoming House District, which is the southern part of Goshen County, includes Torrington, Lingle, Fort Laramie, LaGrange, Yoder. I'm a small business owner where I help do bookkeeping for other small businesses, and my side hustle is running a couple little apartments, and also do some precious metal exchange and stuff like that.
So, Scott, you're running for re-election. What initially inspired you to run for office?
Well, a couple years ago, I would say the climate of COVID was what kind of initially started it, and started attending a new church where Jeremy Haroldson was the pastor and wasn't working on Fridays, and decided to drive him down to Wheatland. And as you know, you go down there and you watch and observe, and it's just appalling what you see. I would say the former legislator didn't represent the people of Goshen County very well. The bill that kind of put the nail in the coffin for me was when she got up front, advocated for adding 2 more parents on the Wyoming birth certificates. So there would be a total of 4 parents. And the idea was to allow parents who couldn't have kids just sign the child over to other people. So the first 2 would be the biological parents, and then the second 2 would be the kids or the parents that are going to raise the child. And something in my spirit was like, this is bad. And as I prayed about it, the Lord just revealed to me that it's like there's a lot of unintended consequences in this, and there could be a black market for children and all sorts of things if you bypass the adoption process. And so I was like, oh, that's a very bad deal. So that was just one of many things that kind of spurred me on to run.
So you've been in there for 2 years. What surprised you the most about working down in Cheyenne?
Probably the thing that surprised me most is the fact of how much they want to keep you in the dark. So it's like pulling teeth to get information from the different agencies, or even understanding the entire state budget. I mean, everything is set up that only a select few really know where all the money is. And so it's dirty down there. I'm very optimistic in this upcoming election that we'll have new leadership and be able to clean things up and actually be able to do things that are for the betterment of the people of Wyoming.
I think the way it was explained to me best was that the state budget is like a giant ball of knots, and you pull on one string and it just ends up tightening up on the other side, and it's just really, really hard to unwind. Let's say that you could unwind it, Scott, and that it was up to you. What would you do with the state budget? Would you cut it? Do you think that there are things that need to be funded? Where would you begin with that?
The number one thing I would do with the state budget is eliminate all the trust funds and bring the money back to the legislature, that those things have to be accounted for. And if you think your program is good and helping people, you need to come back and ask for it every budget session. That would be the number one thing, because who knows how many things we're funding in perpetuity that we don't even know what we're funding. And so I think that would be the number one start. The number two start would be cut spending. It's horrific how much money the state spends. And then if you think of how much not just the state spends, but then you break it down to even the county and the city levels, there's a lot of tax dollars that go through this state without, there's just a lot of tax dollars that I believe we're being overtaxed on, especially with $30 billion investment reserve account. And there's multiple counties that have enough money in savings that they could operate for 4 years or more. I think give back the people their money and let them decide how to spend it best.
Now, you're a member of the Freedom Caucus, Scott, and you guys have taken a lot of criticism over the past 2 years. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that everybody's so critical of the Freedom Caucus?
I don't really think, at least in my district, the people here are not very critical of the Freedom Caucus. They know that the Freedom Caucus stands up for liberty and personal rights and responsibility. And so it's really just the liberal media and the echo chamber they surround themselves with that I really feel are criticizing it. But the criticism is, I believe, when you are over the target, that's when you're going to get the most flack. And so I think they see their reign in power coming close to an end, and it's freaking them out.
I think a lot of it boils down to their desire to continually getting reelected. I mean, we're in the middle of an election, obviously, and there's a lot of people running around that I know for a fact are not real Republicans. By real, I mean, they're not really conservatives. They believe in spending and big government and huge programs and all of those things. If you could for me, why don't you explain what it means to you to be a Republican?
Well, the number one thing to be a Republican is follow and honor and even understand the Wyoming Republican Party platform and all 23 points of it. And it's really simple. And when I first read it, moving to Wyoming and everything like that, I was amazed at how much of the principles are biblical principles. And so that makes it even easier to follow, because life is sacred and people are created equal and all sorts of things like that. And so it's really hard to find something that, if you are a true conservative and a true Republican, that you would disagree with.
Okay, now you say that it's hard for you to find some things that you would disagree with, but what I hear from some legislators is, well, you only really have to agree with 80% of the Republican Party platform. So are there some parts of the platform that you might change that you don't agree with? I mean, obviously some of your colleagues don't agree with a lot of it. So is there anything that you disagree with?
Personally, there's nothing I disagree with. And the problem I see is the platforms are timeless truths. Those are foundational characteristics of what built this country. I believe the problem is people don't have a foundational basis, a moral compass, have you? And if you don't have a foundation and you don't really know what you believe, you are likely to sway in the wind any direction people or other pressures push you. And so I believe that people that are the true conservatives or Freedom Caucus-like individuals have a solid foundation. And when we get accused of voting in lockstep and in a block together, it's actually, we have a foundation that is very similar. We have the Judeo-Christian belief and mindset and God-fearing and believe in our Constitution and how our founding fathers set up this nation and the platform. And so if you have a foundation, those are things that you can't compromise on. And here in Goshen County, there's several different candidates that are running, and it just cracks me up because they tout that we need more compromise. We need more compromise. And when you compromise on foundational truths, it's like pulling out the foundation of your home, and everything else above it just crumbles. And I think that's where we're at as a nation. Is the reason it looks the way it does is because they're trying to attack the foundation.
Okay, well, one of the big criticisms of the conservatives and the Freedom Caucus is that you guys all vote as a block. You mentioned it. And that somebody up from way up above you tells you how to vote. Do people tell you how to vote, Scott? We'll hear Scott's answer in just a second. But first, an absolutely amazing profit timeout. Cowboy State Politics is brought to you by the Wyoming Cartridge Company. They are the purveyors of the most dependable and accurate ammunition you can find at a reasonable price. The ammunition is designed to make you a better shooter with lower tolerances and a higher quality inspection. Every single round that comes out of the Wyoming Cartridge Company is inspected by no less than 4 different people. You're going to buy ammunition anyway. You may as well buy more dependable stuff that's made right here in Wyoming. That's the Wyoming Cartridge Company. It's the middle of summer, and you're probably not thinking about that white crap that's going to be flying around in a few months. But you should. Pretty soon, all of your fun summertime playthings are going to be covered in a giant snowbank. You could prevent that unfortunate circumstance simply by calling Morton Buildings, 307-674-2532. They are the experts in metal building construction. They've been doing it longer than anybody else around, and they definitely do a much better job than anybody else. It doesn't matter if you're thinking about an outbuilding or a garage or a barn or maybe something bigger, like a roping arena or a giant warehouse. The 2 guys you should call are Nick and Jesse at Morton Buildings. Again, their phone number is 307-674-2532, or you can check them out at their website, mortonbuildings.com. It's Wednesday, my friends, and you know what that means, don't you? Gun of the Week time from Gun Runner Auctions. And this week, it's a surprise for you, my friends. It's a Tommy gun. It's lot number 106. It's a Thompson model of a 1927 A1 in 45 ACP. But this one is semi-auto, since you really can't own a fully automatic Tommy gun without a Class 3 firearms license. But in any case, it's in beautiful shape, and it can be yours. It's lot number 106 at thegunrunner.com. The following advertisement was paid for by Reed Reisner for Senate.
I'm Reed Reisner, and I'm running for United States Senate because our politicians have forgotten what's important. They spend billions protecting borders in Europe and do nothing about our border. You deserve better. Wyoming deserves better. That's why I'm running, to serve you. Join me, and let's send new blood and a strong backbone to D.C. before it's too late. Go to reedreisner.com to learn more and join the fight.
And now, let's get back to our discussion with Representative Scott Smith. Welcome back to the program. David Iverson behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone. Before the break, we were talking with Scott Smith, and I had asked him if it's true that all of the members of the Freedom Caucus vote in a block and are told to do so from high above. Here is his answer.
No, they don't. It's funny because I've had this conversation with my wife and even another legislator's wife. And I remember calling another legislator's wife, and I was like, why don't you just control your husband and tell him what to do? Just jokingly. And she's like, oh, no one controls my husband. And so my wife would say the same thing. We kind of just do our own thing. But most importantly, between me and the other colleague that I talked to, a spouse, it was, I believe we're being led by the Lord, and being led and guided by the Holy Spirit is the utmost important to me. And so those are things that, above all, I'm accountable to Him and then the people in my district. So those are what really guides my voting. And so it's pretty hard to persuade me. If you feel like God's calling you to vote a certain way, good luck trying to convince me otherwise.
Okay, well, you're kind of unique in the legislature. Well, I think all of you guys are unique, but you lead a Bible study, a prayer session every morning before you guys get started. Can you tell me a little bit about how that works out, how you got started with that? Just talk to me about it.
Okay. Well, it was something that Jeremy Haraldson started 2 years prior to me even getting there. But when I would go down to the Capitol, I would pray with the legislators, and that was such a neat and unique experience. And then when I got elected, most of Jeremy Haraldson's committee meetings were in the morning, and he was no longer able to take action there. And so I just naturally took it over. So Abby Angelos and myself have kind of taken the reins at that. And we even not only pray during session, but many of our legislators, we get together once a week in the mornings, Zoom in and still pray together. That's something that's unique and special to me, that people who pray together and fight together become like family.
Clearly, your faith is a big part of your life, and it is for several of the folks that I know down there. And this question might seem a little obtuse, and we've kind of been sort of hitting around it a little bit. So can you explain to me how your faith influences the work you do in Cheyenne?
My faith is not able to be separated from who I am. And so my relationship with Jesus Christ and the power of His Holy Spirit leading and guiding me is something that is very, very important to me. And I've had a very exciting life. Just being obedient to God and going where He calls and leads me. And I end up in places I never imagined. So even being born with a disability, living overseas in Honduras and being a teacher at an orphanage, those were all things that were scary for me to do. But acting in obedience, I don't have any regret of it. And the more you walk in obedience to what God has for you, the easier it is to hear His voice, the easier it is for you to walk in His ways and have no regrets, and have that faith like David going after Goliath. Like, hey, God, you got it. I'll be here. I'll be the conduit. And so it's pretty much how I take the legislature. There's a lot of giants trying to take you out, and it's like, Lord, I trust you. And so I would say just trusting Him to lead me, guide me, give me wisdom are all just a tip of the iceberg of the things that He's done. And knowing when to speak up, knowing when to be quiet are all a part of that.
We've talked a little bit about how you go about your job down in Cheyenne. Let's get down to some specifics. If you get reelected, and I've no doubt that you will, but when you get reelected, I guess that's a better way to put it, what are you going to work on in Cheyenne? Do you have some specific ideas, bills that you want to run? Is there anything in particular?
There are several things in my district specifically that I hear regularly, and number one is property taxes. And I do believe Mark Jennings laid a good foundation for the acquisition-based property tax, and I would support that 100%. But even as recent today, I got off of the phone with a constituent, And back in 2019, our irrigation canal, one of the tunnels collapsed, and that's just been an ongoing problem. I tried to get it funded last time. This is a good example of listening to the Lord. I tried to get it added to the budget to fully fund the project so we can get it done. And my district is one of the number one ag producers in the state, and we heavily rely on our water down here. And that canal really needs to get repaired. And so, and it's for the betterment of not just the local farmers and ranchers, but it's for the good of all the people, because those irrigation canals replenish our underground water tables and everything like that. And so otherwise we wouldn't even be able to be here if we didn't have that. And so we wouldn't have our city water and all that kind of stuff. But that would be probably my number one deal. And the estimate that I got today was over $130 million for the tunnel projects. Yes. And so the state has already appropriated up to $20 million. Nebraska is responsible for 50% of that. And so that water in Wyoming is very, very important. And so that would be top of my list.
Okay, fair enough. So then you do have an opponent this year, by the way.
Hello! Welcome to So Addicting!
So yeah, you do have an opponent this year. So why should Goshen County elect you over your opponent?
Like we were talking about foundations, our foundational truth, what we believe is leading and guiding us, are very, very different. I would say I pretty much align myself in values that of like Harriet Hageman, whom grew up in this district here. And my opponent very much supports Liz Cheney. And so you take their belief systems and our belief systems, and you can see a stark difference.
So last question, and I saved this one for last because you tend to be one of the people on the floor that you really don't say too much during the legislative session, but I can really tell that you're watching the whole thing. Now, we've got two groups on the floor of the House of Representatives. One of them is the Freedom Caucus, and the other is the Wyoming Caucus. And I think people get pretty confused as to who's who. But I guess my question around that would be, what exactly is the Wyoming Caucus?
The Wyoming Caucus are, see, I believe a lot of the Democrat type agenda is typically they blame you for what exactly they are doing. When you think about the Wyoming Caucus, they accuse the Freedom Caucus of voting lockstep in barrel with one another. They do that way more. You just look at evidence-based Wyoming, and there's a whole bunch of 31 Republicans in a really, really tight cluster. And the freedom-minded individuals are spread out all over the place because we are independent thinkers and not told how to vote. And God has given me compassion for these people because I've thought, like, okay, do these people really believe it? And they just, it's that biblical truth and concept of they believe what is evil is good and good considered evil. And so I don't even think they think what they're doing is destructive and evil for the state of Wyoming. But if you can't define what a woman is and you're constantly supporting immorality with legislation, that is who the Wyoming Caucus is. And that's, I believe, why a lot of the Freedom Caucus people have risen up and said enough is enough. Because if I had my way, I would be happy doing my own thing, spending time with family, and running my business and just staying out of politics. But it has just become part of what is necessary to bring the state back to and preserve, more than anything, just preserve the state of what America used to be. And I think Wyoming is one of the last places. And that's why we have a huge influx of freedom-loving people and individuals moving to this state, because it's the last place that's truly free.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. And actually, I do have one more question. I thought of it while you were answering the other one. You're from a pretty small community, too. You live in Lingle, right?
That is correct.
All right. Lingle, pretty small town. I grew up in Buffalo, slightly bigger, but still a pretty small town. We tend to have this view that leave us alone, we'll handle all our stuff. We don't need the state or anybody else telling us how to run our town. I run into that all the time. Well, there are a lot of issues that we're facing with schools. You mentioned the What is a Woman Act. There's a lot of stuff that's going on with the LGBTQ agenda. We'll just use that vague term for all of it. Boys and women's sports and, the whole thing, porn in the library, all of that. So my question is, what is the role of the state government? How do you balance local control with the role of the state concerning all of these issues? I mean, there's a whole host of them. So where is it the state's responsibility to jump in and take care of a lot of this stuff?
I think as far as like state control versus local control, the state is responsible for things that are going to affect every citizen. The best example I could probably give would be one of the governor's vetoes in this last session with the gun-free zones. He claims that it's up to local control, and that's why he vetoed that bill. But for the state, it would be much better to have one universal law or basically an allowance of what our Constitution already says do not be infringed with our Second Amendment. And so I don't think that should be up to local control, because I could go from just in my own district from one municipality to another municipality. And in one municipality, I'm totally fine to carry my firearm. And then in the next municipality, I'm totally illegal. And I think there needs to be some consistency across the state in a lot of those things. But as far as daily operations and how they spend their funds and what they prioritize for their people, totally fine and up to them. But I think a lot of these big issues of the gun-free zones and organizing the property taxes, and I feel like a lot of the biggest problem is with our society is we've remained silent for too long, and nobody wants to be brave and have courage. And I think a lot of these school districts, they're fear driven by, we're going to get sued. And I think having the state stand up and say, you know what, we're not going to have boys in women's sports and pornography in the schools gives the school districts a little bit more courage and a backbone to stand up. And I think then they'd be able to go through everything else and look at the curriculum and see. But I think it takes somebody to stand up and have that courage.
I like it. Well, Scott, we've covered a number of issues today. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't already discussed?
Nope. I just want to thank you for what you are doing with Cowboy State Politics and the Independence Network. I will tell the listeners and that even after a long night in the legislature and we get out at 10 or 11, I still listen to your program before I go to bed, because even though, like you said, I'm paying attention to what goes on, I still learn a lot from you listening to your podcast going before I go to bed, and learn about people using offices illegally and things like that I miss out on. And so I just sincerely thank you for what you're doing for this state.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. So if people want to get a hold of you, how do they do that? Okay. Well, you can reach out to me on my website, and it would be www.scottsmithwyo.com. And my personal cell phone is 307-575-3742. Feel free to send me a text
if I'm not able to answer, but I will get back to you.
Scott, thank you very much for spending some time with me this afternoon. Appreciate everything you do, and you're welcome back here anytime you like.
Well, thank you, David.
That'll do it for today's installment of the program. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk again on Saturday. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns, or wherever I'm at on my honeymoon adventure, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.